What's up, everybody? My name is Brascus, and welcome to a very special edition of, well, it's not really Mordheim. This is the first in a series that I'm going to start doing every so often that I've decided to call My Thoughts on the Matter. Now, a lot of you recently have been asking me for advice, tips, tricks, requests about builds for individual units in Mordheim. Specifically, most recently, I received a request to do a video on the DLC units and recommended builds for how to make them awesome. So the first thing I want to do is answer not so much a question, but address a situation that comes up a lot. A lot of people seem to be asking me, is this a good idea? Should I go with this skill? What spell best complements this other spell that I've already picked? Is it a good idea to go ranged? Should I use poisons? In short, the answer to all of those questions is yes. The guys at Rogue Factor did an amazing job putting together all of these units, and they're very well balanced. Their stats are fairly equal, although they excel at different things depending on which unit it is, obviously. They've got a wide variety of skills. Each warband, even though it's unique, can do almost everything the other warbands are capable of. Obviously, they're not all to the same strength, but they can all do just about whatever you want them to do. If you want your henchmen to be ranged, you can do that. If you want them to be straight up melee, not a problem. Do you want to be focused on dodging? Go for it. Parrying? Go for it. There's not really a limit, you just have to be careful and pay attention to the skills. For example, somebody asked me recently if it was a good idea for Skaven henchmen to go with poisons and ranged weapons. Standard Verminkin can only use shuriken. And same goes for the Warp Guard. They can also only use shuriken. You can see that over there on the right under the description. Shuriken don't do a lot of damage. That being said, if you choose to put points into their poison skills, they can still slow down or limit their attacking ability of the enemy, depending on whether they go with numbing poison or warp poison. Keep in mind, though, that henchmen can't master a skill. Any of these skills, except for the one that they come with, can't be mastered. Henchmen just can't do it. They can't ever learn the second tier of a skill. So if you're going to go with poisons to their fullest effect, stick to heroes. Now, the purpose that this video was actually for was, again, to go over builds regarding the two DLC units. These involve the Poison Wind Globadier, and for the mercenaries, you have the Smuggler. I'm going to start with the Smuggler, just because I know it less, and I've kind of worked up my ideas in advance, and I'll be more able to offer and expand a lot more on the Poison Wind Globadier later. So the first off, there are two main popular builds that I've seen for the Smuggler, and the Smuggler can really do both ranged and melee. For the purpose of our video here, we're going to focus on first one and then the other. So right off the bat, they're capable of using axes, daggers, and swords. For maximum damage, I'd probably recommend dual-wielding axes. Their armors, they can only go up to light, although they can wear helmets and pendants. So you'd probably want to focus more on their agility than their toughness. Personally, this is just a preference. I would rather them get out of the way than have to soak the damage, given that their armor is, again, only light. That being said, there are ways around it. For example, the Armor Proficient skill. Movement penalty reduction increases to 2 meters and allows armor absorption to be increased by 5%. Now the downside to this is you have to master the skill to do it, and they can't equip heavy armor. It'll increase their light armor absorption, at least to the best of my knowledge, but it will not allow them to wear heavy armor. Now, somewhat contrary to what I said before about maximizing damage with double axes, the Smuggler is probably better served by following what it seems to be the traditional mercenary path of parrying. A lot of mercenary units have access to parry skills like Web of Steel, Flash Parry, and various other shield proficient skills that give them a better chance at counterattacking and blocking incoming hits. The Smuggler is no exception to this. Access to Flash Parry, Shield Specialist, and Retaliation really help her to just sort of take a central position, let the enemy come to her, and then counterattack rather than engage directly and dish out the damage herself. With skills like Knowledge Tactics, and the various other skills we mentioned before, she'll have a much better time letting the enemy come to her and simply try to counterattack to maximize the damage that she dishes out on the opponent's turn. Another useful skill for the Smuggler to have would probably be Expert Fencer. Since this increases melee resistance and initiative by 5 when equipped with a dagger or a sword, you may want to go Sword and Shield in order to maximize that bonus as well. Now, moving from passive skills to active skills. Given that the build that I'm suggesting increases your parry chances as much as possible, you'll probably want to consider Web of Steel, as this decreases the offense point requirement for counterattacks and allows 2 parry attempts instead of 1. Maximizing it increases that attempt to 3. Riposte Stance is also a fairly decent idea, as this allows 1 attempt to parry an incoming attack and increases the counterattack hit chance by 10%. This would be a good one to use initially for her to run forward, use the Riposte Stance, and then stand there as bait and allow the enemy to come to her, thus letting her chain her counterattacks with maximum efficiency. Now, of course, the real advantage that the mercenary units tend to have is a strong ranged presence. They are one of 2 warbands that are capable of using firearms, and they have a much wider variety of firearms that they're capable of using. They can also use bows more effectively than most of the other warbands, although Smuggler can't actually use bows. She does have access to the blunderbuss, dueling pistol, handgun, hunting rifle, and pistol. In short, just about every firearm that there is for the mercenaries to use. This is really her strongest method of combat to me. While it can be done melee, I feel like you'll probably want to spend the majority of your skill points amping up her ranged attacks, and then sort of using the extras to fill in the buffing and melee as a secondary option if ranged stops being viable. She starts with a black powder trap, which can be used to damage everyone within 5 meters if someone approaches too closely. I like using traps like this to block up an exit. So, for example, she could take a high vantage point and block off a stair route with a black powder trap. This would force the enemy to waste its movement and take damage trying to get to her, which gives her time to get away, reposition, or get ready to engage an enemy that is coming after her. She also has access to the hand bomb, which can be used for crowd control, damaging large numbers of units all at once. The white powder trap is even better, given that you can use this to stun everyone within 5 meters for 1 turn. Just make sure none of your guys are in the area before it goes off. This would allow her to block off an exit to her sniper's nest. Someone tries to go for her, they become stunned as well as anyone else, and your other units can then move in to engage a stunned enemy. This can be a very, very effective strategy. Sniper Shot is a massive boost to any ranged character. Most of your mercenary units should probably try to focus on getting this one if they use a lot of firearms. Other excellent active skills would be the hand shot for reducing their maximum chance to hit penalties, or rather reducing their overall chance to hit, the knee shot to decrease their initiative, crippling shot to reduce maximum offense points, and the pinning shot to reduce maximum strategy points. All of these are excellent choices for limiting your enemy's options in battle. Now, what I've covered here with the skills and build suggestions for the Smuggler really only scratches the surface of what you can do. There are numerous other skills that will complement either build, and I encourage you all to investigate those on your own. Nothing will make you appreciate your unit more than putting a lot of your own personal touches into building them, and what I might suggest may not work for your warband. So play around, experiment, plan carefully, and use what I've said as a basis for building a strong Smuggler yourself. Now, on to the Poison Wind Globadier. Okay, the Poison Wind Globadier is quite possibly my favorite unit in the entire game, and not just because I'm partial to Skaven. Tactically speaking, the variety of situations that the Poison Wind Globadier can address is staggering to me. They're effective at both close range and long range, depending on what build you want to go with. They can provide buffs, debuffs, poisons, ranged attacks. All sorts of different options are open to you with the Poison Wind Globadier. As far as equipment proficiency goes, for melee, they've got access to daggers, maces, swords, and weeping blades. Ranged attacks include the warplock pistols and shuriken, and for armors, they can go with clothing, light armor, shields, pendants, amulets, and helmets. Again, like the Smuggler, you could do either one or an option of the two, but for the purposes of my video, we're going to cover a melee build and then a ranged build. For the melee build, let's start with the equipment. If you're going to go into melee, I highly recommend the Weeping Blades. This plays off of the Poison Wind Globadier's already predisposition to poisons, and with access to the Poison Expert skill, they can be really effective at maximizing the poison damage on those Weeping Blades. You'll probably want to go with light armor, since they do have access to a fairly decent toughness maximum skill. Or rather, maximum stat. Helmets are also an excellent idea, and an amulet to increase all alone test chances would be an excellent idea as well. As far as melee skills go, the first place to focus with the Poison Wind Globadier is under their active skills. This is really where most of their tactical options come into play. First of all, they can use Vent. Everyone within a 5-meter radius around the caster reduces the melee and ranged hit chance by 5%. This will also include him, I believe, but it will allow you access to decrease other chances to hit him. Giving him access to the Numbing Poison and Warp Poison skills before he engages in combat can also limit his enemy's ability to fight back or get away. Warp Fumes will also allow him to increase his melee hit and dodge chances by 10%, but it does reduce his ranged hit chance and ranged resistance by 20. Increases melee, drains ranged. Really, it seems worth it to me if you're going to go with a melee build anyway, as they'll already have a hard time shooting into melee to get you. Make sure that you save the points to master these abilities, though, as that's really where he's going to get a lot of his tactical advantages. Increasing his hit and dodge chances to 20% is pretty sizable, and it also reduces the ranged hit chance and ranged resistance penalties. Maxing out the Warp Poison and Numbing Poison will increase the penalty to your opponent from 2 strategy points or offense points to 4. And you can use Vent to increase the melee hit and range chance penalties by 10% instead of 5. If you're going to go with a melee build, I also recommend taking advantage of the Strong Blow the Strong Blow skill. This will greatly increase the damage that you can do, and will also give you a much easier time fighting units that tend to favor parrying attacks. Again, make sure you master the skill. If you're going with a purely melee build for your Poison Wind Globadier, I also highly urge you to consider the Frenzy skill. This one's kind of an all-or-nothing skill. It does increase your damage by 15% and magic resistance by 5%, and you'll always counterattack when the option is available. But it prevents the use of ranged weapons, stances, spells, and most non-combat actions. This persists until the user is stunned, out of action, or until no enemies are in sight at turn start. You can obviously read all of this along as I'm going. Mastering it increases the damage to 30% and magic resistance to 10%. Think about that for just a second. A permanent 30% damage increase and resistance for magic, as long as there are enemies within view. You might not be able to do as much venting, but if you're running around using Strong Blow and Weeping Poison, that adds up to a lot of damage very quickly. Along with their high toughness stat, the Poison Wind Globadier also has high accuracy. This will allow you to take a lot of skills that fit under the accuracy header, such as Vital Strike. This is great if you're going to try and stun an enemy first. When you combine that with the various other skills and bonuses and the fact that each point of accuracy gives you an additional 1% crit chance, maxing out Vital Strike increases that by another 20. That gives you an almost 40% crit chance once those have all been maxed out. Using Precise Strike will make it easier for you to hit your targets if they're being particularly difficult. And Headshot might allow you additional chances to stun, which is always a big boost to your damage. If you need to, you can use the Introspection and Meditation skills to convert your offense points or strategy points into offense points or strategy points. This will allow you to spend those unused strategy points to give you extra attacks, or will allow you to spend those unused offense points to give yourself a little extra movement range if you want to try and get into combat that much faster. Now to my personal favorite build for the Poison Wind Globadier, the ranged one. I vastly prefer ranged because it opens up a lot of possibilities for buffing or crowd control that you don't have with most other units in this game. Warp Lock pistols is obviously the preferred equipment as they do a lot of damage, but you may want to consider using Shuriken in the early levels simply because they take a lot of offense points to fire. Definitely invest in the quick reload skill so that you can get as many attacks as possible without wasting all of your movement points. The Poison Globe is sort of the crown jewel of this unit to me. It allows you to poison large numbers of units, which persists for quite some time, given that it will do initial damage when you enter the cloud or when you're hit by the globe, and does additional damage over time for 2 more turns after you've exited the area. Once again, making use of the Poison Expert skill under the passive skills will definitely help to increase the effectiveness of that attack. You can use Potent Globes to increase the effectiveness of the globes themselves, although this won't affect your Weeping Blades or anything like that. This is only for globes that are actually thrown by the Globadier. Another favorite of mine is the Wordstone Lure. Like the Smuggler, this can be used to seal off exits, or entrances rather, to get to your sniping posts. Just set them at the entrance to a small narrow passage, and let it explode when the enemy comes within range. This reduces the maximum movement of everyone by 1 meter for 2 turns, and also deals extra poison damage. I'm also a big fan of the Strangling Globe. This is a major help when you're dealing with other warbands who have casters. Given that it takes you until rank 4 as the Skaven to even get a caster, this is a big help against the Sisters of Sigmar or the Chaos bands, where a caster comes very early in the game. Other solid options include the Warp Globe, providing a random debuff to your enemies, the Enriched Globe, providing a random buff, presumably to your allies, or the Infused Globe, which does give you a debuff, but also restores health to all of the units within the area. Not a lot, mind you, but health is health, right? Just like with the ranged build, Vital Shot is an excellent choice, as it increases your critical chances by quite a lot, just with ranged instead of melee. For passive skills, and I cannot stress this enough, take Poison Expert and max it out as soon as possible. A 40% poison resistance bypass is an enormous boost to this unit's damage output. For passive skills for the ranged build, I highly recommend Quick Reload and Eagle Eyes, along with Overhead. Eagle Eyes bypasses armor absorption. Overhead increases your chance to hit from a higher up position, where you'll probably want to be to avoid engaging in melee anyway, and Quick Reload will, again, maximize the number of attacks this unit gets per turn. Those suggestions for skills and equipment should give you a pretty decent base for your Poison Wind Globadier. As before, play around with the other skills to try and personalize the unit to best fit your own playstyle. A couple of parting thoughts before I wrap this up. I would encourage you to focus on a few main skills. I feel this increases the unit's overall effectiveness at higher levels. So rather than pick 10 different skills that you want, pick a few and make sure that you try to master them instead of just spamming a whole bunch of them. They'll be more focused in a particular area, and maybe they won't be able to handle quite as wide a variety of situations, but they'll be a lot better at handling the situations that they're designed for. Also, don't be afraid to experiment. As I said before with the Smuggler, not all of my ideas are going to fit well with your playstyles. Some of you may be hiring these DLC units as part of a Sisters of Sigmar warband or a Chaos warband, and you may have to adjust those builds to fit those different warbands' playstyles. I hope this has addressed a lot of the questions and concerns you guys have had about how to build effective units in Mordheim, and I hope that this is an effective video. It was kind of my first video like this, so if I stumbled a little bit or made some mistakes, please forgive me, and I'll try to do better in the next video that I do. If you enjoyed it and found it helpful, feel free to share it. Please hit the like button and let me know in the comments below. I think that's about all I've got for this video, so I'll go ahead and wrap this up, and that concludes my thoughts on the matter. See you guys later.